Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony CyberShot RX100 Mark VII on the left, brand new, $1,200 US, and the RX100 Mark V, which is now a ripe old 2-year-old camera. Now, in terms of pricing, similar. I mean, $1,200 US versus, I think now you're with the 5A, you can probably find it for around $900, $1,000, something like that. But I expect the price on this to drop. It's 2 years old. It's not the Mark VI, okay? In addition to that, it doesn't have a lot of the features you're getting with the Mark VII. So unlike the comparison of this, the Mark VII to the Mark VI, they're slightly different or almost completely different beasts in spite of having a very similar 1-inch sensor, form factor, menu system, and overall usability. So let's get into it. Which is right for you? First and foremost, know in advance, and if you've watched my other comparison, this is going to seem repetitive, but I have to hammer it home. With the Mark VII, you are getting an autofocus system that simply does not live in any other RX100 before it. It outclasses it in every way. It's the first thing you got to know. Both for still and video, you've got real-time tracking. You have basically a baby A9 in terms of autofocus performance. You've probably heard this already, and it's true in my experience so far. Brief, my experience is, but true, that is also in terms of its performance. Beyond that, you have a microphone jack. Doesn't live on this. So there's no way to connect a microphone to the RX100 Mark V. The RX100 Mark VII also has, beyond better autofocus, a microphone jack, it also has active steady shot in 4K video that does not exist here. In other words, at the expense of cropping some of your image, your video that you're capturing, you will have stabilized video unlike any RX100 before it. So unless you plan on using a gimbal, that is kind of a big deal if you're a video shooter. Now, beyond those core things I just mentioned, the RX100 Mark V does have some advantages, like an ND filter, which is going to help you tremendously in bright light, something the Mark VI and Mark VII do not have. It just simply was not something that could be engineered in this form factor. It would have had to come at the expense of a larger camera, and Sony opted instead to stick with their pattern of differentiating from smartphones, and that's exactly what they did with this 200mm reach, which the Mark VI also has, but doesn't have its autofocus capability, the active steady shot for 4K, doesn't have the microphone input, does not have the threshold for overheating that you can play with, which means that even though both of these shoot 4K video, that's great, this one without the active steady shot, but with an ND filter, the key here is that you do have faster glass in spite of not having a 200mm reach. That's another important thing. So if you're looking for the better low light performer, you'll have it here in the Mark V. You have the same flip around display, the same old menu system that every Sony user I think wishes would be updated. Basically the exact same EVF that will pop out. This is an added grip that I've thrown on for those of you that are wondering. The Mark VA is really, in my opinion, still going to make the majority of users happy. But those of you out there who say, why do I need a 1-inch sensor camera? I have a smartphone. Hey, I've got the brand new shiny Note 10 Plus. I don't need that. Well, that's where the 200mm lens matters. It makes a really big difference. And that's without even getting into the autofocus that I already mentioned. You're not getting 200mm from a smartphone. Here, you're capped out at 70mm, but as I mentioned, ND filter and faster glass are going to be more important to some users. But I have a feeling those same users are going to wish they had a microphone input, because you're kind of the same group, you know, the really fickle ones. I'm just kidding. All jokes aside, that's the core difference between these two cameras. So size, functionality, you already know. With the Mark VII, you are getting the best of everything. With the Mark VA, you're getting an ND filter that I wish was here, and you're getting faster glass that I wish was here. But the trade-off, in my opinion, for the 7 is fantastic, because I don't really care that much about the mic input, but the autofocus, killer. Does it blow this away that this is no longer worth considering? Absolutely not. I wouldn't be doing this comparison. It's ridiculous. But it is another level of performance that simply didn't exist before it. That's something that you have to be aware of. Anyone who tells you otherwise is a liar. But when we step away from the autofocus and look at the rest of what it can do in terms of just still and video capture, I've mentioned it already. The key, the critical thing is, if you want to shoot a lot of video, in spite of not having that ND filter, which, by the way, is a versatile thing I already said I wish it had, being able to remove the overheating cap limitation that exists on this camera is critical if you want to be able to shoot more than 5 minutes. Because after a few clips, scuba diving with this camera, I had all kinds of problems with overheating. Now, that's not a use case for everyone. This, I don't plan on having those problems with, because I will be able to control the threshold. And then the active steady shot. If you plan on using a gimbal and you're going to vlog, do stuff like that, the RX100VA is going to be a great choice. If you have no need for that extra reach of the 200 millimeters that's sitting on this and the Mark VI, why even consider them? But if you care about that active steady shot in the 4K, which I do, if you care about the autofocus system, which I do, it's really tough to look back at the 5A and say, the faster glass and ND filter are all that matter. They're important things, but again, it's all about what compromise you're willing to make. And again, these are pretty close in price. Now, if you can find an open box 5A for $500, grab it. I mean, that's an amazing camera at that price. I've seen it. I don't like buying open box, though. God knows what people have done to those things. Use your imagination. But when it comes to retail pricing, if you're looking at $1,000 here and $1,200 here, boy, you must really love that ND filter and the slightly faster glass, because everything else is in the Mark VII's favor. And again, I'm not knocking the 5. I even like that the original 5 had access to the Play Memory Store, and you could still use those apps if you paid for them. Free apps too. It's a good feature. I mean, it's a consumer camera. Let's face it, pros and consumers alike may love the RX100 series, but the facts are the facts. Having those apps wasn't a bad thing. I mean, I'm not saying so many people miss them, but they don't exist here. This does have built-in interval capability, so you can do a time lapse, but that's where it begins and ends. Otherwise, their Wi-Fi and NFC functionality is all about just transferring images and utilizing your smartphone as a display for framing purposes. I mean, that's where it begins and ends. So at the end of the day, I've made it really clear, hopefully. This is all about the ND filter and the faster glass. This is all about improvements across the entire board. Which matters more to you is what's going to make you decide which camera's right for you. Because for me personally, the 200 millimeter lens in the Mark VI, that mattered. I cared about that. And it was more valuable to me than the ND filter over here on the right. And now, throwing in the video features that we have and the autofocus, and I'm not even including the microphone jack that everyone considers the holy grail, if all of those things amount to your perfect camera, then absolutely the money is well spent in the 7. However, if you're like me and you don't care about the mic jack that much, and your main priority is better low light performance and the ND filter being on board, and you don't shoot that much video, the RX100 Mark V, 5A, is a no-brainer, because it's got everything you need. You don't need to spend $1,200 to get all of these new features just so you have the latest and greatest, because you're not going to actually be using them. And that's the real deal. It's the news that's fit to print. Sorry, New York Times. That's what's up. So again, Mark VII right now, clearly my favorite because it's just got everything. And that's what Sony should be doing. Every new RX100 should be better than the last. That doesn't mean, though, that previous generations won't have things to offer that the newest does not. And that is why Sony still manufactures all of these. So, as usual, I've pretty much covered everything, and I'm not getting into the high, the HFR. I mean, like that stuff is crap in my opinion. It's usable, don't get me wrong, but it's not why you're going to purchase either of these cameras, is it? It's because these cameras can do just about everything, and you don't really have to bring anything else with you. And those of you that are still thinking that your smartphone will outdo them, don't bother buying these, because you're clearly not that interested in what these cameras are capable of. I'm not saying that in low light they can shoot in the dark. No, this isn't an A7S. Come on. It's not. But compared to your smartphone, yeah, they'll do some software tricks. Fantastic. This is a real camera. So when people say to me, why would you spend $1,000 or $800 on one of these as opposed to your smartphone? Ask yourself, what is your smartphone primarily? It's a phone, isn't it? It's access to the world technologically in terms of the internet. It's your connectivity. That's its primary function. These, their primary function, photo and still righteousness. And both of them do a beautiful job. Of course, the Mark 7 is the king. But you got your fill on which might be right for you, and I think the 5A still will satisfy 90% of the market. The 7, though, is for the rest of you, like me, who want it all, baby. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.